So we get asked all of the time what our inspiration was behind the Land of Eem world, the game, all of our book series. Well, today on the Wizards of Eem podcast, we're sharing our very own Appendix N. The books, the movies, the comics, the shows that shaped the game, from the Muppets to Conan the Barbarian and the Lord of the Rings.
All right, welcome to the Wizards of Eem Podcast. I'm Ben Costa, that's James Parks, and we're the creators of Land of Eem. And if you're not familiar with the term Appendix N, we're kind of taking a page from old Gary Gygax, who wrote
The Grand Master.
He wrote an Appendix N in the original Dungeon Master's Guide, which was basically a list of all of the further reading that players should dive into, all the influences of Dungeons and Dragons. Let's get it out of the way. The Lord of the Rings meets the Muppets.
The Lord of the Rings meets the Muppets. Yes, we hear it all the time. We think it's a pretty good way to explain the Land of Eem, at least from our perspective. Although, of course, like Adventure Time and others are inspirations of ours. But the Lord of the Rings meets the Muppets is sort of where the core of the Land of Eem was inspired from our direct perspective. But they're not the only things that inspired us. There's lots of stuff. And so, to get it out of the way, it's obvious that we are inspired by Fraggle Rock, the Muppets, Labyrinth, and
I would say
Crystal.
Labyrinth is, I think, in terms of Land of Eem specifically, is
Tonally.
the biggest one.
Yeah, tonally, visually.
Influence out of those.
Yep, for sure.
With Labyrinth, we really connect on just the cadence of the voices in the movie, the way all the characters are characterized. Like, I feel like that's just a huge influence when we're making Land of Eem stuff.
And it definitely represents the kind of whimsy, fantasy, party dynamics that one might actually see in a Land of Eem adventure game. You've got Ludo, you've got Hoggle, Sarah, I couldn't think of her name. Jennifer Connelly, who plays Sarah. You've got these characters that are all coming together with different backgrounds, different skill sets, and they end up trying to achieve a goal together. And so that obviously it works a lot like a tabletop role-playing game player group. And there's definitely elements of just that dynamic with a little bit of a whimsy that is a major inspiration for the Land of Eem.
Yeah, and even when we're writing stories and generating ideas, we'll just use Labyrinth as an example of what we're trying to convey to the other person. Like, in Labyrinth, when like this happens, and I feel like that happens every book we write.
Yeah.
Whereas the Muppets, Fraggle Rock, they're all influential, but they're not like directly influential.
I think that Jim Henson's approach to his creations, to characters, and just to the media that was produced by him and his team, there is a heart at the center of it, a warmth at the center of it that really inspires Ben and I to apply that warmth and heart to the Land of Eem. And so the Muppets is just a quick way to communicate that all of the work of Jim Henson and the lighthearted spirit of Jim Henson and that work is a major cornerstone into the Land of Eem.
And I do want to touch on Adventure Time. We often get, I think that for our player base, Adventure Time is probably a bigger draw than the Muppets.
Sure.
And Gathering.
Yeah.
But James and I, while we like Adventure Time, it wasn't a big influence on our world or the game. It was sort of like this other thing that was happening across the room while we were like creating things.
Yeah, I think it's because we're
really
the same age demographic as Pendleton Ward. We're like
Yeah.
We grew up at the same time as him and are inspired by similar media.
Yeah, I just find it really interesting. So
yeah, love the show. It's fantastic. Like, I'm a huge Adventure Time fan. It's brilliant.
So the other part of the equation, obviously, Lord of the Rings. James and I are huge Lord of the Rings fans. Hobbit, everything Tolkien writes, pretty much. We love it.
Yeah, huge fans. Tolkien to us is like one of the greatest writers that ever lived for a lot of reasons. One is, honestly, just the language of Tolkien. Like, reading Tolkien's writing and the wisdom that exists in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit is always an inspiration for me, especially when telling, fantasy epics, Rickety Stitch or Dungeoneer adventures that are for kids. But The Lord of the Rings has this element of heroes in a world in peril. That is something that Ben and I are really inspired by as well. We love the idea of you've got these lighthearted heroes, but the world is in big trouble. And when you're playing a game like the Land of Eem, especially in the Land of Eem, we want the players to represent the heroes of this world. We want them to be fun and have fun and it be funny and there's all these things. But the actions that they take and the quests that they go on as they emerge throughout the Muckland sandbox is one of heroism ultimately, where this world that is, not so squeaky clean on the outside is in real bad straits. These heroes are there to try to make the world a little bit better again. And so, The Hobbit, I think of the hobbits, I think of Bilbo and Frodo and the quests, the great quests that they go on. And they're not your typical fantasy hero. They're not the knights in shining armor. They're not the superheroes. They're just regular people that have particular skills and are growing as characters that are doing their best to face off against, a terrible threat that is challenging their world and ultimately threatening their homes.
Things can get really dark in the Lord of the Rings. And, if there's one thing that we really mirror in the Land of Eem, it's that. It's this everything seems fine because it's a bunch of cartoon characters running around. But in the background, there's some dark stuff going on. There's, the undead are being risen, and there's a dark lord, and there's a lot of forces in the background that are creeping. All right, so what are some of our other influences? Well, obviously Star Wars.
We grew up on Star Wars. It's the classic hero with 1,000 faces blueprint for an epic adventure. You've got your rebellion versus your empire, the lovable scoundrels.
A faction like the Jedi, especially the Jedi and when we're talking about Star Wars, we're only talking about the original trilogy, pretty much. Just how the Jedi are really similar to the Order of the Ember, like this outcast group, few in number, rising from
mostly
the ashes,
forgotten. Yeah,
and that's like a huge through line through.
Plus the fact that there's like a lot of imperfectness, like the Mucklands specifically is like kind of post-apocalyptic. I mean,
yeah,
we're both huge fans of Mad Max. And that kind of gritty, but sometimes humorous, over-the-top satire about, the end of the world. There's a lot of that influence in the Land of Eem. There's obvious places like in Rickety Stitch, you've got the Middle Route Run, where it's literally quite like Mad Max, where they're doing this giant gauntlet across the desert. There's, marauders and things. But the like grittiness and the uncertainty that you see in Star Wars as well. You like on Tatooine, it's like a hive of scum and villainy. It's, out there in the fringes. That little
even
bit
just
of
the
patina,
aesthetic of
the aesthetic,
patina,
yes.
Yeah.
A little bit of patina. Like nothing is like, everything's kind of broke. Everything's a little dirty. Like that's something that has always inspired us as storytellers, because for us, it's a simple tool to make a world feel lived in, especially one that requires heroes to rise up and go on big adventures and accomplish their goals.
Right. And it's a big influence on something like Shrim. Steampunk is like a touchstone, but that's not really an influence on us as people. Like we're not big steampunk people, but like the aesthetic of Star Wars, beating up droids and devices and stuff like that. That's kind of the biggest influence on the technology of,
for sure. Yeah. And sort of adjacent to that, going to Shrim and like the sputterbots and droids and things. There's also this element of corporate humor that makes me think of RoboCop, which is like a funny influence for Land of Eem, but it's definitely there because RoboCop is like a great action satire. It's like, it's gritty and it's violent, but it's also kind of hilarious in its subject matter and the way that it treats corporate America or the way that it treats like tycoons and things. That kind of over the top, like wild, like out of control corporate industry kind of vibe is definitely something that we wanted to embed into the Mucklands specifically, because it really lent itself to not only, Rickety Stitch's story with his series, but also how the players would be living in this like post-apocalyptic industrial zone that used to be a fairy tale land. It's definitely an influence, even though it seems to come out of left field.
And could we even throw like Brazil in there,
Yeah, totally. Speaking of Brazil, just like Terry Gilliam art direction aesthetic, like that really special magic that Terry Gilliam movies have are definitely like Time Bandits, Adventures of Baron Munchausen, Brazil. They all have this really specific, ludicrous amount of detail.
That's another one that we reference a lot, Adventures of Baron Munchausen, when we're writing stories. Just like, oh, that part in the movie where...
Which is such a funny... Like, no one even knows what that movie is. Like that movie had all this baggage to it. But for me, it's like got all these inspirations for the type of whimsical fairy tale fantasy elements in Land of Eem that are coming from a place of, upbeatness, despite the subject matter being touchy. Now, and speaking of influences that come out of nowhere, I will bring up Conan the Barbarian again right now.
This is a big one for us.
The Land of Eem, in a weird way, got its start after watching Conan the Barbarian together. The story is basically, we were just like marveling at the movie Conan the Barbarian, the first one, at the amount of tremendous depth that this world promised with very little effort. Or at least it seemed to us very little effort at the time.
Like, a lot is unsaid.
So much is unsaid. And we thought, gosh, what a wild, interesting world Hyperborea is. Because we're both familiar with Robert E. Howard's stories. I've read everything Ben has too. But it was the Conan movie presented us in just a very particular way that we were just like, God, this script is great. No, like this is a great script. It's got this incredible hero's journey. And there's this whole world around him that he's got me asking for more, but at the same time understanding it all. What if we could apply that to Fraggle Rock?
Yeah, you may be wondering, like, how does that work? How does Conan really influence Land of Eem? A lot of stuff in the background, like the grittier stuff, the darker stuff that's not on the front cover. You know what I mean? It's, you gotta open the book and start reading deeper into the lore to really pick up on things.
How did the world get to where it was? Like, how did the Mucklands end up the way it was? How is the Land of Eem in its current state? Well, the basic story is that the Land of Eem is like kind of a post-apocalypse. Like the primary villain of the world is the Gloom King, completely mysterious figure. The reader knows very little about who the Gloom King was, what the motivations were, what's going on. They just know that a long time ago, the Gloom King kind of destroyed the world. And this is everybody living in it, making do with what they've got. And things are getting a bit better time after time. But there's always this like unknowable evil that exists in the Land of Eem, which Conan the Barbarian kind of provided inspiration for in its own way. So got Conan out of the way. Conan's taken care of. Okay. Another major influence on us is comics, specifically a comic by the great Stan Sakai called Usagi Yojimbo. Now, this is a series that Ben and I have talked about on our school visits throughout the country as one of the most influential pieces on both of us and one of the main reasons we got into comics in the first place. It's the story of a samurai rabbit named Usagi, Miyamoto Usagi, who goes on a sweeping dramatic adventure, kind of like a wandering Ronin through a historical landscape in feudal Japan that's filled with animals. And it's got these great pacing. It's got like lone hero, rolling into a dusty town, Western vibes. And it's tremendously well researched. It's a kind of traveling adventure story about a hero that is, for me at least, it's been a really inspirational. It's something I read like every couple of years. I like read the whole series.
Not only the, story content, but Stan Sakai as an artist, biggest influence on me as an artist. I feel like that bleeds into all of my character designs and
the visual style, combination of cute, but also, dramatic.
Yeah. And it feels like we keep coming back to that cute and dramatic thing. I mean,
yeah, why can't you be
funny animals chopping each other's heads off? I feel like
there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that.
Yeah. That's Land of Eem. And really right next to Usagi are the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That's how I discovered Usagi in the first place from the show. And I consider that a huge influence, mainly from like a overall perspective of who we are creatively. I know I was super influenced by the Ninja Turtles for a decade of my life growing up. I mean, I have a child of my own now, and I see that he goes through phases really quickly. Like he'll be into one thing and then like a couple weeks later he's into another thing. I was into the Ninja Turtles for so many years of my childhood that it's sort of mind blowing that I stuck with it for that long.
Yeah.
like 6, 7, 8 years of your childhood is a long time.
And continue to stick with
Yeah, exactly.
I'm right there with you. Yeah. Like the Ninja Turtles, just it like friendship, loyalty, and just offbeat adventures, just offbeat genre bending.
And weird characters, like strange character designs.
Yeah.
Mutants, all of our weird, pun creatures. I feel like very influenced by the Ninja Turtles.
For sure. And leapfrogging off of that, I'm going to add the Masters of the Universe as well. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe in terms of quirky characters, like really offbeat type adventures, but with a heart of gold, like it always had like that like heart of gold to it because He-Man's a nice dude and he's always trying to do right by people. But also more practically, the color palette of Masters of the Universe is maybe one of my favorites. I mean, I've got some art behind me of Hordak and some of the wild characters, but the color combinations. Oh yeah. Yeah. The same series. These were a gift from Ben.
Yeah. I got this huge series of Earl Norman Norm art. And like as a whole, all of these cartoons that we grew up on, a huge influence on Land of Eem. That's like Rickety Stitch. It looks like a cartoon, there's a reason for that. It's what we grew up on. And it's what initially inspired us early on to love stories and be into all of this stuff.
And jumping back to Usagi Yojimbo, the tonal shift of Usagi, where it can go from cartoon to dramatic and potentially even dark or violent, that we adopted right away and threw it into that cartoon vibe, which is why it looks the way it does.
Indeed. Another comic that it was a big influence on both of us is Hellboy and BPRD. Just the way it weaves folklore and myth and, monster of the week type storytelling into it. I feel, big influence on our quests and just the way we approach writing adventures and stuff like that.
Yeah. Obviously the story of Mike Mignola's the artwork and story, it's really compelling visually. It's gorgeous work. I love the story being told in between the panels with all that noir, like the shadow, the folklore, like Ben said, the myth, those occult elements. Both Ben and I are huge fans of. But at the heart of Hellboy, there's also like a little bit of like fun, like inside joke Americana stuff going on with Hellboy as a character that I also enjoy. Kind of offbeat, and that's we say offbeat a lot, but there's an element of an unlikely hero vibe going on in Hellboy that we also love, and that we love in other media as well.
And last of the comics that we've got listed here is Bone, which I think encapsulates everything we've been saying in terms of this dichotomy between cute characters thrust into a perilous world. And I think
Bone's case actually like a high fantasy world like Land of Eem.
Yeah, cartoon characters literally in this high fantasy world where a greater plot is unfolded in front of them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's Land of Eem right there. You know what
it
I mean?
is.
It's good stuff.
Oh, yeah. Classic Land of Eem.
So what about games? Okay. We've got, we played a lifetime full of games that led us to this point, and huge part of that was how we started gaming, and, we stuck with it quite a long time. AD&D second edition. I think that's where we get our, old school sensibilities from.
Yeah.
We've never really played long campaigns of 3rd, 4th, or 5th edition. We're always going back to older versions for some reason. And we like the aesthetic. We like the, I guess, more hardcore feel of gameplay. Like you're less of a superhero. You're pretty ordinary,
Yeah.
and you gradually gain power. And it's more about finding magic items and delving into dungeons and exploring.
Totally. Like that ordinary person with enough courage to do something extraordinary, I think, is at the core of it for me.
Yeah. And part of this is it's not anything that anyone else would be privy to, but the games that we've been playing with our core group of friends were at this point designed by our friend Amir Rao, we've talked about him plenty of times. But that's a
shout out. Hades 2 just came out.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Supergiant Games. But Amir's influence on us is real. Like he's designed games and we would help help them out here and there. And that kind of rubbed off on us. And the style of play that we all cultivated together, I feel, is in Land of Eem. And that's kind of like what we made a game that we want to play and how we play to reflect how we play.
It's got elements of ideas we like for example, the Star Wars RPG, the Fantasy Flight D6 Star Wars RPG. We played a lot of that and gradations of success.
Yeah, Fantasy Flight, the dice pool, as well as the D6 game was like the first RPG that I ran a long campaign for. And it was the first game that I started hacking, like creating little, the first thing I did was create ways to progress through the Rebel Alliance. And so there were like abilities for like Sergeant and stuff like that.
So good.
It was really fun.
Sorry, super fun.
And just the concept of here's your power, roll to see if it, like you roll your dice and see if it works, that type of thing. That led into what became Land of Eem, that core idea. And then the Fantasy Flight game, it was the first time playing a game where the gradations of success kind of lead you in different paths than the binary success and failure. Even in combat. And that was kind of eye-opening where you hit, but there's a complication or, whatever they call it in the game, I forget. But maybe that means you accidentally shoot the speeder bike and it explodes or something like that. Just leading you into more narrative directions, not only through social situations, but, combat stuff where you can take the combat scenario into really interesting places. It doesn't have to be a hack and slash back and forth.
Yeah. Let's see, what else? What other games? Dungeon World, powered by the Apocalypse.
Yeah, and that's I feel like that's just an extension of Fantasy Flight in a way from our perspective. It sort of mirrors Land of Eem in a way of 2d6 and we're doing 2d12. It's different for sure, but there's similarities there.
But the gradations of success or failure are similar, and that can be that I that's one of my favorite elements of the gameplay really is.
And Dungeon World was brought more like relationship stuff that I thought was cool that didn't really see in other games of its type. So yeah, some big influences there. This may be controversial, but I'm going to name World of Warcraft as an inspiration.
Is that, I don't know why that's controversial. You'll have to explain that to me.
Well, I feel like I like World of Warcraft more than you.
I mean, you want to play it all the time. Like you want to like, hey, let's do hardcore characters or whatever. And
and specifically classic World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
I don't play it all the time, but I want to play it with you.
That's what I meant. That's what I meant. No, I totally get it. And really, I could go on forever with games with giant open world maps that really inspire like my approach to sandbox play. Like we played Conan. Speaking of Conan, we played Conan Exiles with George, which was fantastic. We really liked that game. There is, honestly, one of my favorites that is like tonally really different from Land of Eem is the Fallout series. I grew up with Fallout 1 and 2, loved them. That was like the first like RPG that I got fully immersed in. I mean, I played things like Chrono Trigger and Legend of Zelda and that sort of stuff, but Fallout really captured my imagination because the world was just like, wow, like this whole world is alive. And I hadn't really experienced that in a video game just yet. And it's definitely like influenced me with discovery, just like not knowing what's around the corner.
I think that's why I name World of Warcraft, because that was like the first time that I felt that like mind blowing, like, whoa, there's a lot here.
Right. And World of Warcraft does it even differently because you're not traveling spec by spec on the map like in an old Fallout game. You're walking across the world, which is really cool.
You see the biomes shift as you're walking through. And when I was making the map, I was like thinking of that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Visually showing how to show that and the way travel works regionally. Like, okay, we're going to this different place. We're going to encounter different creatures. You walk into this area and it's like you're going to be encountering things way above your pay grade. All the time.
Right. Early in Land of Eem. Early in Land of Eem's development, we thought about like level capping, I guess is what I can't think of a better way to say it. Level capping the different regions so that you would climb your way through. And then pretty early on, before we got much further with that idea, we flattened it out so that it was just a story driven. little bit, I don't want to say like more like Lord of the Rings, because I would say that there's different threats like in the door. Like obviously Mordor is, you don't want to go there unless you're sneaking through. But yeah, just that open worldness of World of Warcraft definitely is an inspiration.
And another game, Diablo II. James and I, Diablo II fiends in our lives.
We've made a million hardcore characters.
And I think the itemization of Land of Eem reflects that, just like having a D400 table of items and D200 table of magic items and a system of randomly getting these items through treasure hoards and stuff like that.
Item slots to like simplify like what you can carry and not carry. How many times have we said, I got to pawn some of this stuff? And we were like, come up with item slot numbers. There's Diablo 2 is interesting because there's so much of it that's item driven, but it also has, it kind of also has like pretty awesome biomes if you think about it. Like Diablo 1 is another game that like kind of blew my mind with like the richness and immersion that I felt like playing that game that I just hadn't really felt before. And that games like that just have that drip with atmosphere, but also have great mechanics are something like we were just talking about that before we were recording, simple mechanics, but a super rich environment can really amplify the quality of a game session.
Yeah.
Also Yahtzee.
Oh, Yahtzee.
Huge fan of Yahtzee.
Huge inspiration.
Land of Eem was originally going to come out with cups to roll the D12 in. That's not true. Sorry.
I'm sure there are more influences, but we didn't write them down. And
yeah, it's the kind of thing we could go on forever, but I feel like we covered like a lot of the major big ones and why.
Yeah, and we get asked a question a lot of like who is Land of Eem for? And we see this being asked quite a bit. From our perspective, it's for everyone. We look at it as like an all ages game. It's not for kids. It's not for adults.
Yeah, it's great for kids run by adults. That's for sure.
But we didn't set out to design a game for kids. And I think that's gets misconstrued probably due to the art. Yeah, if you are a fan of any of these stories or games that we're talking about, I think you will find something to enjoy about Land of Eem. There's a lot there. There's a lot of pages. There's a lot of material to dive into. We're just scratching the surface, honestly. We're finishing up the Underlands, and we're working on more content, more classes, and more sandboxes in the future.
Yes, indeed. So shout out to all the creators that we mentioned in today's podcast. If you're unfamiliar with any of these properties, they're all stuff that we would recommend checking out. They're all very different from one another, but if you like Land of Eem, you may also like these if you haven't seen or read or played them.
Shout out to Gary Gygax for creating the first Appendix N.
Yeah.
And when you mention Gary Gygax, you got to shout out Dave Arneson because he's an unsung hero.
He is.
And
we had the honor of meeting him and hanging out with him for a weekend, which was really cool. Anyway, that's about it for today's Wizards of Eem podcast. Thanks so much for listening. We really appreciate all the support. Huge shout out to all of our patrons for keeping the lights on here. And thank you to everybody on Patreon for supporting us, all of the folks on our Discord, and everyone downloading the quick start guide on landofeem.com. We're hearing about your games kicking off. We're super excited about it. And we've got a lot more coming down the pipeline for everybody. So stay tuned. That's about it. Fare thee well.
Bye-bye now.